A screen is your right-hand man, as the name suggests. Because of this, it's really important to know how it works and how to use it.
So, what's a screen?
Alright, so it might not look like much now, but this is where you're going to make your image and print it. It's essentially serving as a stencil for you to use over and over and over again. Now what? How do I use this thing? So simply put, the steps are prep, exposure, loading, cleaning, and reclaiming. Right in between loading and cleaning is actually printing. We're not covering that today. That sounds really weird, but we're not going to talk about that today. What we're actually going to start with on this list of going in depth in is exposure. That's really simply put where you take the image and you make the stencil. Easy, right? And then after that, you're going to load it once it's all dry and clean and ready to go. You're going to take the screen, you're going to tape all the sides, and you're going to put it up to a light, and you're going to check, see if there are any pinholes in there, and you're going to take some scotch tape and cover those. Ideally, you don't want any, but they come up. If your exposure time is right on, you're going to be great. You're not going to have to worry about it. Once it's loaded and all ready to go, you're going to do all your printing. Then from there, depending on what kind of ink you're using, the cleaning process is going to be different. I'll go more in depth on this probably on a separate video, but honestly for what I do right now, I have water-based inks and they are water soluble. So I just spray them down when I'm done taking every last drop of ink off of that screen as possible. Now, once you're totally done with the screen, totally done with it, because sometimes you'll use them multiple times. Sometimes you'll use them, take them down, have to use them again. I know how it goes. It's not the most fun process, but it does happen. So, once you're 100% done with the screen, you're gonna go and reclaim it. That's where you take some sort of spray thing, some sort of chemical, you soak the screen, then you spray it with that chemical, and then you're probably gonna have to scrub it. You're gonna take some sort of pressure of water at it and take all that emulsion off. At the end of this step, what's best to do is to degrease the screen. So you got oils in your hands, they're all nasty, they're getting on the screen, they're stopping the screen from being able to hold as much emulsion as they need to hold. So you take that, put degreaser on it, wipe it down, rinse it off, and then try not to touch it with your little paws before you actually get to put the emulsion on it. Which brings us back to prep. I know you might have been wondering why I skipped prep. That's because degreasing or prepping it for exposure happens at the reclaiming stage typically. A lot of the time, I'll just take baking soda and just drizzle it on there a little bit, and then I'll wipe it down, and then I'll just rinse it off. That's actually a really good at-home remedy. It works well, it does what you need it to. It preps the actual silk to adhere to emulsion a lot better than it would if you just tossed it on there willy-nilly. It is important to do prep. It is important to make sure that the screen itself looks good and is passable before you actually coat it with emulsion. So you might be thinking, that's not hard, that's easy, I got this. And you're 100% right. That's probably the biggest benefit of screen printing. It's accessible. The issue is that this thing goes really deep, and every single one of those steps that I just mentioned has countless variables that will drastically change what your end result is. Fortunately, there's a lot of overlap between the most important ones. So we'll be covering mesh count and some of the basics on how emulsion works today. So mesh count generally operates on the principle that a larger mesh is going to result in finer detail capabilities, and a lower mesh count is going to result in more ink. So, more mesh, more detail. The con to that, you're going to have to put more pressure on it, and that could end up resulting in less consistent results. However, if you have a machine or auto press running, that's not going to be a problem. Or if you just get to the point where you're honed in and you're dialed in and you're good, shouldn't be a problem as long as you know which things to look out for. Less mesh, more ink, which you can get less detail, and I'll go over that with some diagrams in a second.
So right here I have another comparison between two different mesh counts, this high mesh count on the right and this low mesh count on the left. So it's a pretty obvious difference between the amount of detail that you can get on these and this little bleed outside of it. That's something that you will actually be getting on your prints. Although it should be at a small enough scale that you're not really noticing it, it's not really catching your eye, it is something that happens. So the amount of detail that you can get between a low mesh count and high mesh count greatly impacts what your prints are going to look like.
Mesh count is determined by threads per inch. These are some common mesh counts. You have 110, 160, 180, 230, and 305. 230 and 305 are best used for simulated process, anything with halftones, super intricate details. These ones are pretty good. 160 is a pretty common use. You can get a lot of general use done with 160 to 180. 110, it's better for things that you need to be able to push a ton of ink through. 305, really tight knit. 110, really loose. And I'll show another one on the simulation.
So this is a simulation of what a 160 mesh looks like in 1 inch. And this is compared to, I think this is like a 60 or a 50. I did a really wide gap between these two. So the holes that the ink is capable of going through on this one are way bigger than the spaces in this one where the ink can go through. So it's kind of obvious by this side by side how much detail you'll be able to fit on this as opposed to this.
Emulsion is how you make your stencils. It's one of the most important and sensitive parts of the process as far as pre-production goes. This one is light sensitive, so you want to do the majority of this either in the dark, so get really good at knowing where everything is without seeing it, or find a light sensitive, light safe environment to do all of this in. There's a lot of different emulsions out on the market, and I think the science and the history and all of that nitty-gritty stuff definitely deserves its own video. The main idea here is that you're just burning in the stencil and then you're washing out what's left over. Okay, so how do I do that? Hold on, I'm getting there.
6.5 hours later.
This is a transparency sheet. It's known as a lot of things. I like to call them transparencies, but as you see here, it's got like, you can see through it, but you can't see through the parts that have been inked on. Basic concept, basic idea is that you take the transparency sheet and you put it on top of the screen, place it in reverse so that it burns in correctly. Then you shine a light on it for the appropriate amount of time, as illustrated here. And then you wash it out. You wash out what was burned in, and you're left with this. If you're familiar with film photography, it's the same kind of principle as a film negative, where you start with the reversal of what you want, but then you end up with the right results. But that's through chemical and washing out process, which I will cover as well.
Right here we have a simulation of what emulsion kind of looks like right before it gets washed away after you take the transparency off. So that's emulsion. Then right here we have without emulsion. After it's been washed away, it leaves that little vacancy where your ink is going to go through. When you're coating your screen, you're going to want to start from the front or the substrate side that's going to be facing the print. This pushes air bubbles out, and then you go to the back and then you do 2 passes, and that should thicken the emulsion on the actual substrate side. Here's another view. You're aiming for 6 inches per second on this, and don't worry that I'm doing this in the light. This specific emulsion is kind of slow to react to light, so it's okay that I'm doing this as long as you're working fast. Here's a good cross section. That bottom part is what's gonna be facing the print. You want that part to be thicker because once the emulsion is washed out, it should look like this. Your ink is going to be going to fill that channel, and you want those edges on the bottom to stop the ink from bleeding into the outside portion of your print. The goal right there is to make a seal on that edge between your emulsion and the shirt you're printing.
If you're still wondering which screen to get, 160 should cover most general purposes. If you're doing something incredibly detailed, do a 210 to 305. I wouldn't suggest doing a wooden frame. I do have wooden frames. I showed those earlier. I did stretch them myself, and that's why I would suggest getting them professionally stretched on aluminum frames for so many reasons. There's just a lot more utility to them. But if you really do want to do wooden frames, or you feel like you need to, I will link a video below to that kind of shows one of the ways that you can do that. This is a subject that I do want to go a lot deeper into. It's something that I'm really interested in. So if you have questions, toss them in the comments and I'll get back to them. I'll answer them as fast as I can or as well as I can. And who knows, I might even do a video on it. But yeah, screen printing as a whole, that's something that I want to do a lot more on. So if you have any questions, let me know. And yeah, have a great day. Like and subscribe. If not, that's okay too. Thanks for watching it this far either way. You guys are great.